when I work with customers, the company I work for, it's TrueSec, right? So we are divided in different parts. I don't belong to the security people. I belong to the people that builds infrastructure and secure infrastructure. That means we also rebuild customers. This is the story you don't want to hear. Right now, and for the last 1.5 years, we've been working with incidents for our customers, new customers that we didn't know about. We have about 4 incidents a month. An incident for us means that the company doesn't exist anymore. It's vaporized. It's gone. Every data is lost. Everything doesn't exist. Nothing. The company is no more. That's an incident. We have 4 of them every month, and we've been doing that for the last 1.5 years. And they all suck at security. And they have put themselves in this situation because they are lazy. I don't want to come to your location. I don't want to look you in the eye and say, yes, you deserve this. You made a mess out of this. But the chance that I will do that is pretty large. Why? Because people tend to treat passwords like nothing at all. It doesn't have a value. And if you ask end users about passwords, they usually don't give up the password in 2 seconds. No, you need to fight for it. Here's a bag of candy. Can I have your password? Sure. More than 85% of every user will give up the credentials for a candy bar. The other ones, they give it up immediately. Now, that's not true for admins. No. Admins are worse. They don't give up the password. They provide the password without really knowing it. That's the challenge. Every time you log on to something, you are putting your credit card with the PIN code into that machine. So here's a good example. Somebody calls from help desk and say, hey, there's something fishy going on in my machine. You know, it's weird, it's behaving weird. Can you help me? Sure. So first line support does help. What do? They log on to the machine. With what credential? They usually use the domain credential. They use a domain account because they have one account that have access to every workstation in the entire environment. They use that account. What if that machine is weird? It's truly weird because I have access to that machine and I'm making it weird. I'm stopping and starting services in that machine. Now it's weird. And the only thing I need to do is wait. There's going to be an admin here soon. Yep, there he is. Do I have his password? No, but I can steal his hash. When I have the hash, and I know the name, well, then I can use the hash attack. And when I can use the hash attack, I can attack every other station. And then I can find another name and another hash, and eventually I will be able to elevate myself into being a domain admin. Our penetration testers that work for TrueSec usually become a domain admin within 90 minutes. From nothing to domain admin in 90 minutes. And these are on companies that said, we are a highly secured organization. No, you're not. You suck. For armed forces, police, governments, it usually takes 92 minutes because they are actually a bit more secure. That's average. I think the most time, the time they spent to really hack an organization, I think they spent like 8 hours, and then they were domain admins anyway. because admins tends to leave traces wherever they go. I'm not going to ask you, but I'm pretty sure you have logged on to a machine. Now, the number one thing I can see here is this. This is the default setting for, for the vast majority of servers that I can see in organization. They turn off the firewall because they have a firewall. Really? You have a firewall? Yes, we have a big firewall. It says big, expensive, crappy firewall. We paid a lot of money of that firewall. So we turn off the firewall for every internal service because we have a real... What's wrong with that? Because 90% of all the attacks comes from the inside, not the outside. It's the internal network that is dangerous, not the internet. You should never turn off the firewall. Can you see something else? Yeah, the enhanced security configuration. Well, the only reason why they turn this off is because they need to use the internet browser on a server. Why would you log on to a domain controller that has the UI enabled and turn off the enhanced security? Oh, I need to access the internet. What? For what? Well, I need to check the email or Facebook pages. No, that's not the answer they give me. They tell me we turn it off everywhere so we can access the internet from a server. You should never be able to do that. You should never, ever access anything from a domain controller or even a server, because when you do, you're exposed your credentials without knowing it. Please don't do that. Number two, they turn off remote management because somebody at the security department said remote management is dangerous. Therefore, we enabled remote desktop. At this time, I would like to put up a very big gun and shoot the idiot in the head, because it's the opposite around. Remote management is the safe way and remote desktop is the stupid way. When Microsoft introduced remote desktop in Windows 2000, they said a little note. Sammy told me this. The note was to use in emergency. Remote desktop as a protocol to access a server interactively was designed for emergency. How many of you are actually using remote desktop to connect to servers in other cases than emergency? We all do, right? So, and you should never do that. So what is the problem with remote desktop? It's not really a problem. It's a design. It's the way it's created. It's not created for administrative tasks. It's created for what? It's created for Citrix. It's terminal server. It's, you know, thin station stuff. The only way to access... How many of you know what a double hop is? Okay, so that's one. You know what a double hop is? It's you know it? Yes. So why is double hop an issue? Let's go back to NT4. At the NT4 time, we didn't really have a problem with double hop. They solved it in a very delicate way. It was called null sessions. So if I'm logged on to one device and I need to access another device, they don't allow you to bring your network credentials to the next device. You're not allowed to do a double hop, because if you can do that, you can hop around forever and access everything. So they want to prevent that. But the problem is that you need to log on to a machine and you might need to access network resources, and therefore in NT4 we had null sessions. Null sessions is very interesting because that means you can connect to a domain controller in NT4 by providing the credentials of no name and no password, and then you're authenticated. So by not providing any information, you can download the entire SAM database from an NT4 domain controller, and yes, there are still customers running NT4 domain controllers. And they go like, really? You want to do this? So they fixed that in Windows 2000 with Active Directory and Kerberos mutual authentication, but now they have another problem. The problem is that we cannot still allow the double hop. So that's why they invented two things: Kerberos trust and delegation, and they also invented what's called CRED SSP. CRED SSP. That's a really neat feature. It means that you can take your credit card, pretty much like this. You take your credit card, and you type your PIN code, and then you put it in the machine as a cookie. That's what you do every time you use a remote desktop connection. You store your credentials in the machine, so that if you need to connect to a network resource, those credentials will be used, because we don't allow double hop. So every time you log on using a RDP, you are storing the credentials in that machine. Will they ever vanish? Will they disappear? No, they are stored forever. So every time somebody logs on, you store your credentials. That's the way it was designed. So what account should you use when you use a remote desktop? A local account. But that means you need to have a unique local account for every machine. That is why it's actually pretty fun. Let's go to VM here. I also need to type this correct. corp.monstra.com. I think that's the correct name. If you go to a glasses. I already have glasses. I need better ones. Let's find the whatever. Don't you love these dialog boxes? If you go to a virtual machine and you try to log on to the machine, let's find not that one, but here's a machine. And connect. I ain't going to do a remote desktop connection. I'm going to do a KVM connection. And this is an old machine, but it doesn't matter. I'm going to hit Control-Alt-Delete. And I'm going to go back here, and I'm going to have a user. It says sign into via Monstra, and people go like typing administrator. And then it flips to the local account. This is something that annoys people. Why do Microsoft do this? What's the purpose? To prevent you from doing the dumbest thing you can ever do, logging on with an administrative domain credential on a local machine. But the only reaction people have is like, oh, I need to type the domain name. Yes, you really need to do that, because that classifies you as a stupid idiot. What they should do is if you try to do that, they should say instead, pop up a message and say, are you really sure you want to do this? Because you're stamping this machine with your local credentials. Don't do that. So it's actually a prevention mechanism to protect you as the admin. But people react differently and say, oh, I hate them, and I need to type the domain name. Sure, you need to do that. Now, 80% of all the attacks are done by administrative privileges, meaning that the only account the attackers are out and try to get is your account. They don't care about users. Nobody cares about users. It's your account. You're the key master. You have all the keys to everything. If we can get your key, I'm good, right? So that's the key you want to have. And when we look at the company, we did that a month ago. It turns out that the privileged account, the admin accounts, they hadn't changed the password for 1,400 days. But they are forcing every user to change them every 2 weeks. So why doesn't admins need to change I have a complex password, so I don't need to change it. Does it really matter what kind of password you have? No. Complex or not, nobody cares. We don't need your password, we need your hash, and your hash is generated, and therefore the only thing we need to do you know you can find your own hash and crack it on Google? Because most of these hashes are already being taken care of, so they are publicly available. You can use Minikats, dump your hash, take a copy, and Google for crack hash, paste it in, and it shows your password. And if it does show your password, you don't have a strong password. Then we don't need to use the pass the hash attack, we can just use a password. So 80% of all these attacks are admin. And it's admin privileges. And that means that whenever you get this dialog box, this is going to be the same thing as, how many of you have kids that is in the age of they buy things and they don't always have the money? That means that every time my son comes to me and say, "Dad, can I borrow your credit card?" That is a signal for me to say, "No, why do you need to have that?" "Well, I need to buy something." "Well, I can buy it for you, but I will never give you my credit card." That's the same warning. Whenever you get this dialog box, you need to ask yourself, why do I get this? Why is it popping up right now? I'm already authenticated. Why should it ask for credentials again? And the only reason we need to have this is because we are using other credentials, which is in that case fine. But if it's a process that requires CredSSP, that means you're going to store your hash in that device. And the question will be, can you trust that device? You can never do that. You have no idea who's going to be on that machine, who's in that machine right now, because everyone that have access to that device, and they happen to be admins, they will be able to grab your hash. So you can never really do this at all, unless you're very, very safe and sure that it's protected. It's never protected. It's like skimming devices. Whenever I put a credit card in a machine, I usually try to punch it a bit, because can I really trust this device? Maybe I can, maybe I can't, and if I can't, I ain't going to use it. I do have limitations on my credit card, but the limitation means that I'm going to be bankrupt even before I can pay the bill, so don't do that. So attackers does this, and it's nothing fancy at all, but it means that you need to start thinking about tiering. How many of you have tiered all your servers? None. 1, 2, 3, 4. How many tiers do you have? 3 tiers? Yeah, that makes sense. And tier number 1 is your domain controllers?
0, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Are you running virtualized? But you're considering running virtualized. So what happens with the hypervisor then? No matter what kind of hypervisor it is.
Yeah, we're requesting secure one, because otherwise...
Exactly. So the hypervisor itself needs to be minus 1. Because anyone with access to the hypervisor have access to all the VMs. Unless you shield them. And shielding is awesome. It's just you can't do that in VMware. You can only do that in Hyper-V, because VMware doesn't have that functionality. You can BitLocker protect it, but you can't shield them. You also need to identify privileged accounts, stuff like that. And you need to start thinking about something called secondary admins. So you're a primary admin because you have the credentials. What is a secondary admin? Well, a secondary admin is somebody that will have the potential to get your hash or your keys without you knowing it. So when we do this discovery for customers, we turn out that they have 14 members of the domain admin group. That is 14 primary admins. But then it turns out that the design they have make 98% of all users indirect domain admins. That means that basically everyone can, if they want to, become domain admins. That means you have a really sucky environment. Because the 14 people in the domain admin group is not a problem. It's the other 5,400 people that can become domain admins if they feel for it. Can you install a SCOM agent on a domain controller? Most likely you cannot. Unless you do it with least privileges count and you disable a couple of actions that you can't do. Can you install config manager agent on a... No, you can't, because everyone that is a config manager admin is now indirectly also a domain admin, because they can run a script directly on any target. So they can't do that. Oh, how do we patch them? Well, you only have 2 domain controllers, and you're responsible for them, or maybe you have 4, or maybe you have 10. You need to patch them manually, using WSUS or something like that. It can't be automated unless you have 2 config manager environments. You can have that, one for your domain controllers and one for everything else. So that is possible to do, or you can create something like that. But you really need to do this, otherwise you're going to be toasted. And all these accounts have access to all different things. We usually talk about domain admin accounts, but let's say that you work for a bank and you're managing the database which contains all the customer data. That is a privileged account, because you can destroy the bank. Yeah, but I'm just, I don't manage this. I just have the access to modify any record in the database. Okay, so that is a very highly sensitive account. And the same goes for who have access to, Twitter and all that stuff. So you need to start thinking about that. And it's just not about protecting admin passwords. It's everything. And let's talk about admin workstations, for instance. So let's talk about accounts. How many accounts do you need to have if you have a 3-tier environment? Meaning that you're going to have 4 because you have the hypervisor. So, you do really need to have 4 accounts. That could be in 4 different domains, or it could be in 1 domain, but you really need to have 4 different accounts. Who can manage them? Well, if it's a tier 1 account, only tier 1 accounts should be able to manage tier 1 accounts, and tier 2, and so on and so on. A tier 1 account could manage tier 2 and 3 and 4 accounts, but not the opposite around. But that means I need to have multiple accounts. Yes, not only that, you need to have multiple workstations, because you're going to need to have 1 workstation for each tier you're working in. So if you have 3 tiers, you need to have 3 workstations. We have seen customers that have done this, and they have more than 3 tiers. They actually have 7 different tiers. That means that an admin needs to have 7 different laptops. That's very inconvenient. So what they do is that they start working with what's called Privileged Access Workstation, PAWs. A PAW is a workstation that only you manage. It's not a member of any domain. It's a workgroup joined machine. You are responsible. You run virtual machines on top of that. They are all shielded. They are BitLocker encrypted, and there is no password. And there's no way to restore the machine. You redeploy the machine. The privileged access workstations are virtualized, and they have access to the different environment, but they don't have access to each other. So now you only have 1 workstation, but you need to have 3 or 4 or whatever number of VMs on top of that. And they are member in different domains or in the same domain, and they are used for different purposes, because you can't mix these tiers with each other. When you're going to do management for Active Directory, you log on to your Active Directory privileged access workstation virtual machine, and you perform your duties in that machine, and when you're done, you turn it off. When you increase security just a little bit and make it just a little bit harder for yourself, meaning that you need to spend at least 1 or more 2 hours every week when you perform your duties, you're going to make it almost impossible for the attackers to gain access. The problem is that it relies on you. And it's a soft problem. There's no technology on this world that can prevent stupidity. You need to understand this on your own, and you need to take the responsibility and say, this is my privileged access workstation. No, you cannot borrow it. And yes, I have 4 VMs on that machine, and I will use them to access and manage my different systems and platforms. Is it worth it? The extra 2 hours you're going to spend every week? Compare that to you don't exist. It's really black and white here. It's going to cost, and it's going to be annoying, and you need to remember different names and passwords. And no, you can't type them in a notepad and save them. But you can use virtual smart card and then access with a PIN code. And every time you lose your password, reset it to a new one. That's easy enough. Tiering, it's very simple. It's what you can access and what you can't access, in what direction you can do this. This is not really a new technology. It's just the problem is that we cannot see this implemented very much. We can see it at a few customers, but the vast majority doesn't have this. And the worst thing is this, that the really bad companies, they think that moving to Azure is going to solve all the problems. So they take the they take the bad design they have, and they move it to Azure, and they go like, now we are protected by the cloud. You're using the password of summer 2019. You moved it to Azure, and you're using the same password, and you didn't change it for 1,400 days. In what way do you think it's going to be more secure now? Well, it's automatically patched. No, it's no, it's not. It's just you're renting something. Renting something doesn't mean it becomes better. It's just another way of paying for it. The documents for this does exist, and they do exist at Microsoft. So this is all documented, and they're going to tell you exactly how to do it. And this is actually how you do this. The first thing you do is that you disconnect everyone that has domain admin controller access. It's going to be a few people that need access to the actual domain controller, and they're going to be giving a privileged access workstation. Period. Here's your workstation, use this to access this. Yes, it can be virtualized as long as you trust the physical machine underneath it, which should of course be UEFI, Windows 10, 1809 or above, running Hyper-V, shielded VMs and all that stuff. And it should be locked down. Should I turn off the firewall? No, you don't do that. Does it really need to have access to the internet? No, it doesn't. Exactly. It doesn't really need to access anything. So we have a few customers that turned off the network interface from the host, so only the virtual machine have access to anything. So the machine is just nothing. Well, you need to upgrade it. No. It's a machine with no network interface. It doesn't need to be patched or upgraded or anything. Every year you redeploy the machine. From what? Oh, we use our config manager. No, you can't do that. You can't trust them. You do it on media. There are in cases you can have a dedicated deployment solution for privileged access workstation, but you can't trust the generic one. That's not going to fly. You do that, and then you take the next one. Securing privileged access for on-premises Active Directory, and then you have securing privileged access for on-premises Active Directory beyond. The beyond means everything else. So it's first the domain controller, then it's all high target. High target means systems, platforms, databases that has customer data, invoice systems, document check-in and check-out systems. The things that can affect your company. With one single stroke, I can destroy your company. That's a high privilege account. That also means developer. So if you're running DevOps and they are developing their own application and they have access to this, they need to be on a privileged access workstation as well. So the only one that doesn't need to have a privileged access workstation is a regular Joe that works in the canteen and he's serving coffee. He doesn't need to have that because he doesn't have access to anything. Well, he has access to the coffee machine, and that's important for people that drink coffee. If that dies, the company could stay. It could die, actually. That could happen. So, just briefly, if you are using privileged access workstation and you're shielding them, if you could get access to the physical host and it's shielded, then the TPM chip is actually protecting the encryption in the virtual machine. So the VM is actually BitLocker encrypted, but it's protected by the TPM chip, which means that the only way to actually access this machine is to break into the TPM chip. And that is pretty difficult to do if you're remotely accessing a machine using some kind of hacker tool. You can't really do that. It's not enough to be a local admin to access it. You can also use a lockdown policy, a device policy, and that can't even be removed. So it needs to be TPM, UEFI, a modern machine, then you can do that. It's not really that hard either. If I lock down a machine, and in this case, this machine is a demo machine, but I can take that machine. In Hyper-V, it's really, really, really complicated. You check this. And if you build a data center, then you have something called the host guardian system that will protect this. If you are running a local machine, then you have a local guardian that is connected to your TPM chip. So it's just a checkbox. What happens if you uncheck the box? Well, I can't do it while it's running, but I could uncheck the box. The problem is that the VM won't start because the VM has been signed for this particular machine. Can I take the VM and move it to another? No, you can't. It can only run on that machine. So you create the virtual machine, you shield it, you check it, it can only run on your machine. So what happens if you destroy it or you can't access it anymore? It's just an admin machine. Throw it away, build a new one. It takes 5 minutes. I have documents on it. Don't. They're supposed to be somewhere else, not on your admin machine. So it's not really that difficult to check this. I'm not going to talk about that. So, server management. The primary tool is to use what Microsoft has been talking about a long time ago. You should use PS remoting. You should use WMI. You should use the remote tools because when you do, you don't authenticate again. You already are authenticated. You never leave a trace. So it's far, far better to use the RSAT tools on your whatever machine you're working on instead of doing a remote desktop connection. And if you do, then you can start using core servers everywhere because you're never going to need to log on to them anyway. But looking at statistics, when I work with a company, I would say that approximately 99% of every Windows server is a UI-based server. And that means that the company aren't using remote tools, they are using remote desktop. And it's just a matter of time before we're going to get back to the customer and say, yeah, so now you're lying on the floor and crying. Told you. Here's the fee we charge per hour. Now you can cry a bit more. So I do have a company, 2 of them actually, that made this statement. They said, we want to be secure, we want to do it the right way, we're going to shift the core server everywhere. And every admin were like, oh no, that means I need to use remote tools. And that means I need to work differently. And it's going to take more time. And I need to learn new ways to do things I've been used to do. Yes, you need to do that. It's like seat belts in a car. The people in the room here that drives, how many of you are actually on a regular basis using a seat belt? Yeah, it's pretty normal, right? My dad is about 70 years of age. He still believes that he doesn't need to have one because he can save himself by holding in the steering wheel. I stopped trying to convince him. The thing is that it's not really a difficult thing to do. It's just different. He needs to do another procedure when he gets into the car. He needs to take the seatbelt and fasten it. But if you grow up with that, you don't have an issue with it because everybody does it. I ride a motorcycle, therefore I have a helmet. But I don't have a helmet when I'm using a bicycle because I wasn't taught to do so. So this is a soft issue, meaning you need to change the way you work. Okay, so you want to do interactive. Use LAPS, LAPS, meaning that every server has a unique local password. You need to log on to the machine. Fine, you do so using a local admin password. After you have logged on, you reset the password. Then your hash that is stored locally is not valid anymore. And that account, if that machine is infected by an attacker, you can say hi to the attacker, and then you can tell him to buzz off. Because the account he has just stolen is only valid on that machine that he has already gained access to, so it really doesn't matter. But then you need to type in a different password, or you need to copy and paste every time you log on. And that's different from just clicking. Secondary, interactive. Yes, these are the ones you should use if you really, really, really need to do this. Either use remote guard or restricted admin. I suggest you use remote guard. How many of you are, or restricted admin is better, how many of you are using restricted admin when you do this? Nobody. Do you think it's complicated to set up? It's a registry value. You enable it. And then, when you use MSTSC, you use restricted admin. And the fun thing about that is when you actually do this, ain't going to do that, MSTSC /?, sorry, yeah, there you go. It says restricted admin or remote guard. Restricted admin means you can, this is what's going to happen. It's going to take your credentials that you already signed in with and connect to the machine. That means you don't have network access on the other machine. But it also means that you don't give up your credentials. You never put them in. That also means that you actually have single sign-on. It will never ask you for a password. It's going to connect back to your machine using Kerberos authentication to verify that you have a valid ticket. So yes, you're going to expose your ticket, but you don't expose your hash. Remote guard is new. That only works on 2016 and above. But remote restricted admin, that works all the way back to Windows Server 2008 R2. So that means that everybody can use that. Now the difference between remote guard and remote admin is, I only have a few minutes. Guard, remote admin, RDP. It's documented here. And to make it easy, remote desktop connection without Windows Defender Remote Credential Guard, it's really, really bad. You do have access to Kerberos NTLM and access to services, but it doesn't really help prevent pass the hash or credentials after disconnection. And that is what people are using. And you shouldn't do that. So let's go down to the two ones we have. Restricted admin mode. You are supposed to use restricted admin mode. You do have access to network resources, but not as you. You have them as the machine account. So wherever the machine does have access, you will have access. So you can, in theory, download files and stuff like that. You can also do a net use to connect to another server, but that means you're typing in your credentials and you're exposing them again. So it's about figuring out how to access files from other resources. Let's say you want to install something. Mount an ISO. Copy the ISO. Copy the file to the machine using another machine and then log on and install the application. Yeah, but it's easier to... I know. If it's easy for you, it's easy for the attacker. The other one is Windows Defender Remote Credential Guard. The nice thing about that one is that it works when you're not an admin, so users could use that. So for any remote desktop solution you have in your environment, and they are using domain credentials to access it, they can use this. But it's not configured by default. It needs to be configured. Restricted admin mode needs to be configured on the server side. Restricted Defender Remote Control Credential Guard does not. But it does need to be flagged. There are group policies that you can set that says that if you just run mstsc.exe, it will automatically use this configuration. But they are not done by default. You really need to do this if you really need to log on interactively. And sometimes you do. It's impossible to say, oh, you can't. You can never do this. Well, things happen. But using a standard RDP with a domain account, it is absolutely forbidden. You can never do this. When you do, you're exposing yourself. And the same goes for using a domain account while you're in a session. You're exposing you again. Okay, so we had a customer about 4 months ago, middle of the summer. They were really badly patched. No service was patched. And we said to the customer, you really need to get up to, So he said, yeah, we're going to do this. Yes. So we interactively used remote desktop connection to every server in the environment and manually run Windows Update. 4 hours later, the company didn't exist. One machine was infected by an attacker, a SamSam ransomware, and they were waiting for an admin to log on to that machine. So in the effort of trying to make the environment secure, he killed them. What way should he approach? What about using a WSUS server? What about enabling download and install patches and set a time and just wait until all the servers were patched? Or log on locally to run Windows Update. No, he took the domain admin credentials, logged on to every server in the environment, and he was toasted. So you need to use labs. Now, one way to do this is, of course, reading all this information, but I'm going to give you one more thing to think about, and that is this tool called Windows Admin Center. Because Windows Admin Center is, holy cow, Windows Admin Center. This tool is following these baselines. You log on to a web server, you never store your credentials. Then you log on to each server that you're accessing with different accounts. You don't need to have different privileged access workstation because you're doing everything from a web page. The sessions are killed immediately when you close the web page. And everything is done using remote PowerShell. So there's no interactive logon on any machine, anywhere, and you never expose your accounts. So using a darn web page is the secure way compared to all the other ones. Sorry for my feet is making noises. You should read about this. You should start considering making your environment secure. And the first thing you're going to do when you come home is change your password. And then step number 1, isolating domain controller access and privileged access workstation. That is what you need to do. Otherwise, you will be eventually toasted. And I don't want that to happen to you. That means my 45 minutes is up. And thank you for coming to this session. I hope you learned something. And don't cry when you walk out. If you do have any questions, hang around or meet me outside. I won't fly away until 7 o'clock this evening. Thank you very much.